Why did they look at her like that? Like she just asked for the moon in the middle of a war zone. The briefing table was a fortress of skepticism, and Captain Riley, Vortex Harrison, stood on the wrong side of it, the light from the wall. Displays painted her face in shifting shades of blue and green. Griffin HX9 specifications, scrolling past in silent defiance of the doubt hanging in the air. It was the aircraft she had dreamed about for years, a machine that was less a helicopter, more a creature of impossible engineering. But every pair of eyes in that room told her the same thing without a word. Not you. Not yet. Colonel Marcus Steele Thompson's voice was firm, clipped and free of sugarcoating. Captain Harrison, your performance on conventional helicopters is outstanding, but the Griffin HX9 requires pilot qualifications that take years to develop. It's not something you can just request access to. The words didn't sting as much as the unspoken message behind them. You haven't earned this. Stay in your lane. She kept her posture locked, but her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Sir, she said, I've studied every manual, every simulation, every technical document on the Griffin HX9. My flight scores exceed the minimum for advanced rotorcraft certification. I know I can. Major David Blade Rodriguez, the Griffin HX9 program coordinator, let out a quiet chuckle, not mocking exactly, but dismissive. Riley, the HX9 isn't about hitting the minimum. It's about trusting someone with a $150 million aircraft that can do things no other helicopter can, things that can't be undone if you mess up. Beside him, Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Roeder. Chung folded her arms. She wasn't unkind, but she wasn't sugarcoating either. Griffin HX9 pilots are selected from our most experienced aviators. 3,000 flight hours minimum, combat proven. It's not just skill, it's time in the seat. Riley had expected the resistance. She'd rehearsed her counter-arguments 100 times. With respect, she said, her voice steady. Experience isn't just about hours in the air. It's about knowing your aircraft so well it becomes an extension of your will. I've been living and breathing this machine for 2 years. No one said anything. The hum of the displays filled the space where their doubts sat heavy. 8 months later, the room would feel different. 8 months later, they would call her name because no one else could do what had to be done. But on that day, all she could do was go back to the simulator bay, slide into the pilot's seat mock-up of a Griffin HX9 she had never actually flown, and continue preparing for a future that might never come. She would run the startup sequence until it was muscle memory. She would cycle through emergency procedures until she could recite them in her sleep. And when the rest of the base went home for the night, she would stay, studying schematics until the lines blurred. The Griffin HX9 was a monster of precision. Tiltrotor. Design. 40,000-pound lift capacity. 300 miles per hour cruise speed. Operational ceiling of 25,000 feet. It could do what helicopters weren't supposed to do, and she wanted to be the one to prove it. What she didn't tell them, what she didn't tell anyone, was that she needed it. Flying conventional birds no longer felt like enough. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing she could jump and survive, but being told she wasn't allowed. The months crawled until the night the call came in. Fort Campbell, Kentucky, 0200 hours. The situation board lit up with red markers. General Patricia Ironheart Morrison, commanding officer of the 101st Airborne, was missing in hostile territory. Colonel Thompson's voice carried a tension she had never heard before. The general has been captured behind enemy lines. Every conventional rescue attempt has failed. She's being held in a fortified compound 200 meters behind enemy lines. Heavy SAM coverage, elite guard presence, no aircraft can get in. Except one. Riley's chest tightened. The air seemed to thin around her. We need a pilot for the Griffin HX9, Thompson said. The mission is high risk. Extraction under fire. If we fail, she dies. and critical intelligence goes with her. Major Rodriguez's gaze found Riley across the room. He didn't smile this time. This isn't a drill, Vortex. You'll be landing in a kill box, in terrain that'll eat a conventional helicopter alive. You sure you're ready for that? The words came before she could second-guess them. Yes, sir, I've been ready. Chief Chun spoke from the corner, still measured but softer than before. One mistake, Harrison, and we lose the general. And maybe you, I understand. Chief, I also understand what the Griffin can do. Let me show you. The room went silent. Someone gave the nod. That night, on the Fort Campbell flight line, the Griffin HX9 sat under the dim floodlights like something that shouldn't exist. Outside a prototype hangar, her fuselage gleamed in matte graphite, rotor assemblies locked in airplane mode for launch. She was huge, almost transport size, yet balanced on landing gear like a predator coiled to strike. Riley's gloved hand brushed the skin of the craft as she walked to the cockpit ladder. She didn't climb in, she stepped into it, like it was where she belonged all along. Vortex, this is control. Colonel Thompson's voice crackled in her headset. Weather over the target is marginal. Gusts, low cloud cover, visibility less than a mile. You sure you can handle it? She powered up the HX9 systems, fingers gliding over controls she'd memorized from 1,000 simulated flights. The displays came alive. Not cold, not mechanical, but like the aircraft itself was waking up. All systems green, controls responsive. Griffin HX9 is ready for execution. The rotors tilted, the nose lifted. The ground fell away. 300 miles of hostile territory lay ahead. But the Griffin's stealth skin and ECM systems kept her invisible on radar. The ride was smooth at cruise, but in Riley's mind, the real challenge hadn't even started. Vortex, this is Overwatch. The forward air controller's voice was calm, professional. Target compound identified, 12 buildings, heavy. Guard, active SAM sites, generals in the central building. Standard approach is suicide. Understood, Riley replied. We're not doing standard. She throttled forward. Tiltrotters holding airplane mode until the very last second. At a distance where any other helicopter would have been lit up by missile fire, she dropped the HX9 into a steep, controlled descent, shifting to vertical flight in a move that bled speed in seconds. The compound loomed. Guards scrambled. It was too late for them to react. Holy! Overwatch cut himself off. You just flew like a fighter and landed like a hummingbird. Riley. Set down hard but clean. Eye scanning sensor feeds for incoming threats. Alpha Team, LZ secure, move. The Special Operations Team emerged from the shadows with the general in tow. But the real fight was about to start. Enemy signatures lit up the threat display. 3 converging squads, heavy weapons in the mix. The Griffin's countermeasures. Armed automatically, ready to swat incoming missiles from the air. Board now. Riley barked over comms. We're leaving in 30 seconds. Boots pounded against the tarmac. The Special Operations Team surged toward the Griffin HX9, shadows moving fast in the wash of her rotor downblast. Riley's hands stayed on the controls, eyes flicking between sensor readouts and the night beyond. Her cockpit glass. Alpha Team, this is Vortex, she called. Voice steady despite the rising tension. We've got enemy movement from the north, east, and west. You've got 30 seconds. A burst of gunfire cracked through the air. Tracers stitched the darkness. One of the operators glanced back and shouted something she couldn't hear through the cum noise. But she didn't need to. She saw it all on the feed. Muzzle flashes, figures closing in. The unmistakable heat signature of a man hefting an RPG tube to his shoulder. RPG lock, 10 o'clock, Overwatch warned. I see it, Riley said. And her thumb flicked the countermeasure switch. The Griffin's automatic defense system spat flares into the night, right enough to blind the gunner before he could fire. The team leader's voice came sharp in her ear. We've got the general. Move! The cargo ramp slammed shut. The Griffin was heavier now, not just with the general, but with the weight of a mission that could turn in an instant. Riley throttled forward, lifting into a steep climb. The rotors howled in helicopter mode, then shifted toward forward flight as she nosed down. Building speed, then the ground lit up. Tracer lines cut through the night. Chasing her silhouette, somewhere behind, a SAM battery tried to track her. But the HX9's ECM suite shredded the lock before the missile could leave its tube. Overwatch. "We're airborne," Riley called. "Egressing south. You've got 2 technicals in pursuit." 15 seconds to clear their range. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. The Griffin's rear sensors painted a perfect picture. The armored trucks were kicking up dust, gunners swinging their heavy weapons upward. Riley banked hard, pulling the HX9 into a climbing turn that forced the gunners to aim through their own dust cloud. A quick countermeasure burst sealed their fate. They vanished from her threat screen. Pursuit neutralized. Overwatch confirmed. Vortex. That was clean flying. Her eyes stayed forward. Compliments were nice. Survival was better. In the troop bay behind her, the general was strapped to a stretcher, her face pale under the low red lights. The flight medic leaned over her, adjusting in 4. Vortex. The medic's voice came over the internal comm. "She's stable for now, but we need to get her to higher care as fast as possible. We're talking hours, not days," Riley's jaw said. Understood. She had trained for years for a moment like this, but training didn't tell you what it would feel like to know someone's life depended on every movement of your hands. 300 miles later, she broke radio silence with control. "This is Vortex. Mission successful. General Morrison aboard. Request clearance for direct flight to Walter Reed." The reply was hesitant. "Vortex, that's 6 hours at full speed. Griffin hasn't been tested for that duration in combat conditions." Riley's eyes swept her fuel gauge, then the engine temperature readouts. She already knew the answer. "Control, she won't survive a layover. We're going direct." There was a pause, the kind that meant someone on the other end was weighing risk against necessity then. "Cleared for direct. Godspeed. Vortex." The HX9 surged forward, tiltrooters locked for airplane mode, cutting the air like a fixed wing below. Hostile terrain gave way to friendlier ground, but the danger wasn't over. The weather front ahead was a wall. Turbulence, wind shear, maybe worse. "Vortex, this is Flight Surgeon," the medic said over comms. "We're prepping a procedure. In flight, I need absolute stability. Any severe turbulence could kill her." Her gaze locked on the storm ahead. She thought of the hundreds of hours she'd spent in the simulator, running worst-case scenarios. This wasn't a drill. She eased. The controls, guiding the HX9 into a narrow corridor between storm cells, using the aircraft's advanced weather radar to plot a path that kept them away from the worst of it. The Griffin shuddered under the crosswinds, but she held her line, hands steady, throttle balanced. Behind her, the medic worked, instruments beeping softly under the roar of the rotors. 4 hours in, fatigue began to creep in, not in her body, but in the constant tension in her mind. Every readout mattered. Every flicker on the radar could be trouble. She wasn't flying through the night anymore. She was carrying it with her, every second stretched tight. She kept her voice, even when she checked in. "Control, Griffin holding steady. Speed 180 knots. Systems nominal. You're making record time, Vortex," Control replied. "Walter Reed is prepping for your arrival. Weather's marginal." Marginal meant bad. It meant gusts, low ceilings, visibility near zero. It meant the kind of landing where one mistake could put the nose into the ground. She didn't slow. Walter Reed approach control came online as she neared the capital. "Vortex, winds 20 gusting 30. Visibility less than half a mile. Can you make the pad?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes traced the navigation overlay. the virtual flight path threading between the hospital's tall buildings. She could see the landing zone's heat signature on infrared, a pale square in the darkness. "I can make it," she said finally. The final approach was the kind of thing no manual prepared you for. Gusts caught the fuselage and shoved it sideways. She corrected without overcompensating. Riding each burst of wind like she'd expected it, her descent was steady, slow enough for the medics to keep working, fast enough to beat the next gust. The skids touched down so smoothly that, in the back, the medical team didn't stop their work. "Landing complete," she reported, voice flat with exhaustion. "Patient ready for transfer." The ramp dropped. Figures in Red Cross vests surged forward, pulling the general's stretcher. Into the night, Riley powered down the Griffin one system at a time, her fingers moving slower now. When the rotors finally wound down, the sudden silence felt deafening. "Vortex, this is Control." Colonel Thompson's voice came through, heavy with something she hadn't heard from him before. "Admiration? Mission accomplished. That's the most successful Griffin HX9 operation we've ever recorded." Riley slid out of the cockpit and stepped onto the pad. For the first time all night, she let herself breathe. Why did the debrief room feel so different this time? Last time she'd stood in here, the Griffin HX9 was just a dream, and her confidence was something the others thought she'd borrowed from someone else. Now, eyes followed her for another reason. The mission board at the front still glowed with classified reports and operational logs. But it wasn't the specs that drew attention. It was the mission ID Thunder Rescue. Stamped green. Success. Colonel Thompson sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The man who'd once told her the Griffin wasn't something you could just request. But when he spoke, his voice carried none of the earlier doubt. "Captain Harrison," he said, "you just flew the Griffin HX9 into one of the most defended kill zones on record. You extracted a high-value target without loss of life, and you delivered her to critical care in record time." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded once. Major Rodriguez leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've seen the playback. I don't know what's more impressive, the vertical drop approach under fire, or the fact you kept a steady platform for surgery at maximum speed through crosswinds. You made the HX9 look like it was designed for that, Chief." Chen's gaze met hers, not with skepticism this time, but something closer to respect. "You handled that aircraft like it was part of you." Riley could feel the weight of their words, but she didn't let herself bask in them. She thought of the general in the hospital bed, of the seconds that had stretched like hours when enemy squads closed in, of the storm wall that could have killed them all. She thought of how easily the story could have ended differently. When General Morrison recovered enough to stand, she called for Riley. It wasn't a request. The general's office was stark, functional. A desk, 2 chairs, the smell of coffee and antiseptic. Morrison herself looked pale but steady, her posture ramrod straight. "You didn't just save my life out there," Morrison said. "You proved something to everyone who doubted you, including me." Riley shook her head. "With respect, ma'am, I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because you needed to come home." The general's lips tugged in the smallest hint of a smile. "Maybe so. But you've also proven that the Griffin HX9 program has found its perfect pilot. I'm making it official. You're my permanent HX9 pilot from this day forward." The words hit harder than she expected. Permanent. It wasn't just validation. It was a door that had been locked her whole career. Finally open. The commendation ceremony came 2 weeks later. The hangar had been cleared. Banners hung. The Griffin parked behind her like a silent witness. Cameras clicked. Speeches rolled. But what she remembered most was the way Colonel Thompson looked at her when he took the podium. "Captain Harrison has reminded us that experience isn't just measured in hours logged," he said. "It's measured in dedication, preparation, and the ability to become one with your aircraft. Major." Rodriguez stepped forward next. Her performance during Operation Thunder Rescue has convinced us to revise our pilot selection criteria. Technical mastery and dedication can outweigh years in the seat. That's not something we say lightly. Chief Chun, who had once told her she hadn't paid her dues, stood at the microphone last. The Griffin HX9 is not a helicopter for the faint-hearted or the by-the-book flyer. It's for those who think beyond the limits, and Captain Harrison has set that new limit. Riley stood there, medals pinned to her chest, feeling the applause roll over her. It wasn't pride. She felt, not exactly, more like a quiet, deep affirmation that the long nights, the doubts, the dismissive glances had been worth enduring. After the ceremony, she found herself alone with the Griffin again. The hangar lights reflected off its matte fuselage, shadows settling under the tilted rotors. She walked along its side, fingers brushing the metal. "You and me," she murmured. "We've still got a lot to do." The truth was, she already knew this mission wouldn't be the last time she'd have to push the HX9 or herself beyond the expected. Success had a way of writing your name on future tasking orders, and the kind of missions the Griffin could fly were rarely the kind you turned down. Still, the thought didn't scare her. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, she was pulled into the Griffin HX9 Advanced Operations Program, not just as a pilot, but as an instructor in training. She would teach others what she had learned, the way to squeeze every knot of speed out of the tiltrotors without sacrificing stability, how to read the sensors like a second set of eyes, how to make the aircraft feel alive in your hands. But the unspoken lesson, the one she saved for the few who really listened, was the same advice she'd give if someone had asked her on that first day in the briefing room. Never let them convince you you're not ready. Outwork them, outlearn them, and when your moment comes, don't just meet the standard, redefine it. That night, long after the hangar was quiet and the last tech had walked out, she stayed behind. She climbed into the cockpit, powered up the systems just enough to watch the displays come to life, and let the hum settle into her bones. Somewhere in the quiet, she thought of what Morrison had said about proving herself. Maybe she had, but more than that, she'd proven. The Griffin HX9 wasn't just the future of rotorcraft in the right hands. It was something more than machine, more than weapon. It was trust. It was possibility. And for Riley Harrison, it was home. The call came at 3:17. No alarms, no base-wide alert, just the discreet vibration of her secure line on the nightstand. The kind of call that came without warning and never brought good news. She answered before the second buzz. "Harrison." The voice on the other end was clipped. "Deliberate, Captain. Wheels up in 40, Griffin HX9 prepped and armed. This is classified Tier 1. Details on site." Her eyes adjusted to the darkness of the room. "What's the payload?" A pause. Not payload, passenger, and a situation that could make or break more than your career. The line went dead. 40 minutes later, she was walking into the ops room, hair still damp from the fastest shower of her life. Flight suit zipped, helmet tucked under one arm. The atmosphere was tense but contained, the kind of quiet that meant everyone in the room was acutely aware of how little could be said out loud. Colonel Thompson was there, leaning over the mission map, jaw tight. "Vortex, thanks for coming in quick. We've got an asset extraction in hostile territory, civilian operative, embedded in a region that's just gone hot. No military presence on the ground. No safe landing zone. We need someone who can get in and out without being seen." She glanced at the map. Jagged terrain, altitude markers, and red hazard zones painted across a region most pilots wouldn't dare touch. What's the window? 2 hours before they lose comms completely. Once that happens, there's no getting them out alive. Major Rodriguez stepped in, sliding a classified dossier toward her. The face inside was weathered, eyes sharp. The file read, "Michael Asher, Intelligence Liaison, He's got intel that could change our operational picture in the entire region. Rodriguez said, We lose him. We lose months of work. The locals just flipped armed checkpoints on every approach. Portable radar units in the valleys. They'll shoot anything they don't recognize. She studied the terrain. HX9 can make it if we come in high. Descend steep. Stay below their radar horizon on approach. But extraction. She tapped a finger on a narrow canyon barely wider than the Griffin's rotor span. That's going to be the problem. That's why we called you, Thompson said simply. In the pre-dawn dark, the Griffin HX9 loomed on the flight line, rotors locked forward in airplane mode, its matte body nearly blending into the night. Riley climbed aboard. The smell of aviation fuel sharp in the cold air. Systems check came easy. Muscle memory now. All green, engines humming like a low growl in her headset. Control. Vortex ready for lift. Copy. Vortex. Good hunting. The first leg was quiet. The Griffin slicing through the night at high cruise. Altitude high enough to stay out of visual range. Low enough to slip under satellite radar sweeps. Her mind, though, was anything but quiet. She kept circling back to something Thompson had said. This could make or break more than your career. What did that mean? Was this about the intel? Or something else entirely? She pushed the thought down and focused on the nav overlay. The descent into the valley was the kind of flying that didn't tolerate error. 1 degree too far on the bank, and her rotor tips would graze rock. One slip on throttle, and she'd overshoot the LZ. Control, switching to silent running, she reported. Engines dropped to a lower, almost inaudible pitch. Thermal signature minimized. The canyon narrowed, and there he was. Michael Asher, crouched behind a boulder, a compact rifle in his hands. Vortex. I've got visual on the asset, she said into comms. Asher moved like he'd been expecting her, sprinting to the side hatch before she'd fully settled the skids. The hatch slammed, locks engaged. Go, 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 he said from behind her. She lifted, but before they cleared the canyon mouth, her threat display lit up. Radar ping, then another, portable units. Just like Rodriguez had warned. The first missile launch alert screamed in her headset. She was already moving, jinking hard left. Rotors shifting for speed. Countermeasures flaring bright behind them. The missile veered off, but the next ping came faster. This time from directly ahead. 2 incoming, high right, Asher warned. She didn't answer. She dove instead, nose down. Rotors tilting for a near vertical escape. The canyon walls blurred. One missile overshot entirely. The other detonated harmlessly behind them. They didn't speak again until they were clear of the hazard zone. Even then, Asher's voice was calm, almost too calm. You've got skill, he said, but you also need to know something. What I'm carrying. It's not just intel on enemy movements. It's proof. Proof of what? That your general, Morrison, isn't telling you everything about why you were chosen for Thunder Rescue. A grip tightened on the controls. You're going to explain that. Not until we're on the ground. Asher said, but let's just say, you weren't the only pilot they considered. You were just the one they knew could handle what the HX9 really is. She didn't like the way that sounded. Not at all. Back at Fort Campbell, when the Griffin's rotors wound down and the noise dropped away, Asher stepped out without another word to her, escorted by 2 plainclothes agents who vanished into the shadows. Rodriguez met her at the edge of the pad. His eyes were careful, his voice low. Good flying tonight. Vortex, officially, you brought in an asset with valuable intel. Unofficially, don't go looking for details unless you're ready for what you find. She stared at him. Is that a warning? It's advice, he said. Some truths aren't worth knowing. But Riley wasn't built to leave questions unanswered. Sleep didn't come that night. Riley sat in her small on-base quarters, still in partial flight gear, staring at the same classified Griffin HX9 technical manual she'd pored over 100 times before. But the words weren't sinking in her. Mine kept looping back to Asher's voice in the cockpit. It's proof that your general isn't telling you everything. Why had he said it like that? Why drop it in the middle of an extraction when seconds had meant survival? And if it was true, what exactly did Morrison know about her? She shut the manual and slid it aside. The next morning, the base felt different. People moved with the same urgency as always. PT runs, fueling trucks, morning briefings. But Riley caught the glances, the kind that lingered half a second too long, like people knew something they weren't saying. In the flight hangar, Chief Chun was checking over the Griffin's main rotor assembly. She looked up as Riley approached, wiping grease from her hands. You flew well last night, Chun said simply. Thanks. You hear what the intel was? Chun's eyes flicked toward the security cameras in the corner. Then back. Not my lane, Captain, and you do well to keep it out of yours. There it was again, the advice disguised as warning. 2 days later, Riley was called into Colonel Thompson's office. He was leaning back in his chair, a folder open in front of him, Morrison's signature stamped across the top page. You're being assigned to another HX9 op, Thompson said. Rapid turnaround, asset delivery this time. No extraction, no weapons hot unless fired upon. Riley studied him. That's fast for a follow-up. What's the cargo? Thompson closed the folder. You don't need to know. All you need to know is it has to get from point A to point B without anyone knowing it was ever in the air. She knew better than to push too hard. Where's point B? Mid-Atlantic. Old NATO airfield. Decommissioned. Remote. Uninhabited. You'll have escort on the ground. Escort for a delivery that didn't fit at 0200 hours. She was back in the cockpit, but something felt wrong. The cargo wasn't in the troop bay. Instead, a sealed container, the size of a small generator, was locked into the forward section. Its exterior marked only with a single hazard symbol she didn't recognize. 2 armed couriers in black flight suits sat across from it, helmets down, faces hidden. They didn't speak to her, didn't even nod. She powered up the Griffin. Vortex to control, ready for departure. Cleared, came the reply. The night swallowed them within seconds. The first hour of flight was uneventful. Smooth air, low radar signature, no pursuit. But the longer they flew, the more her mind gnawed at the possibilities. The container didn't rattle or hum, but something about the way the couriers stayed rigid in their seats told her it wasn't just sensitive equipment. Then, an hour out from the drop zone, a threat display lit up, not with missiles, but with a comm signal piggybacking on a civilian band. It was faint, encrypted, but she recognized the voice. Asher to Vortex, if you're hearing this, abort your delivery. That container isn't what they told you. You bring it to point B. You hand them the kind of leverage that starts wars. Her chest tightened. She flicked a glance toward the couriers. They hadn't moved, didn't seem to know the signal had broken through. Asher, you have 30 seconds, she said quietly. Into the encrypted return channel. You think Thunder Rescue happened because you were the best pilot? No. It happened because they needed someone who could put this aircraft in impossible places without asking questions. And now you're carrying something worse than anything we faced before. She wanted to ask more, but the channel went dead. Wind buffeted the Griffin as she descended toward the coast. The drop zone beacon was already on her HUD, a blinking point in the middle of black ocean and darker land beyond. 2 minutes out, she called back to the couriers. No reply, just the same rigid silence. Her hands hovered on the controls, but her mind was somewhere else entirely, weighing the chain of command against the possibility that Asher was right. If she diverted now, she'd be disobeying a direct order. But if she delivered this, and Asher was telling the truth, the moral weight was heavier than the cargo. She slowed the Griffin's descent, eyes scanning for alternatives. A fishing trawler's heat signature offshore, a narrow strip of land that could serve as an eyes. Emergency set down. "Captain," one of the couriers finally said, voice flat. "Stay on approach. No deviations," her instinct screamed. The last time she'd ignored them, she'd almost lost an entire ground team. The coastline grew sharper. In her display, the beacon pulled her in, and still. Her hands hesitated on the throttle. The coastline loomed like a jagged shadow beneath her. The beacon pulsed on her HUD, demanding obedience with every blink. "Captain," the courier's voice cut through the rotor hum. Sharper now. "Final approach. Stay on course." Her fingers rested on the throttle, but her mind was nowhere near the descent path. Asher's words kept circling back like a warning flare. "You hand it over, you start a war." She had seconds before commitment. "Control," she said into the open. "Channel, Griffin HX9 on final approach." Then she switched channels mid-sentence, adjusting vector for crosswind compensation. Only there was no crosswind. She pushed the stick forward, banking hard away from the beacon, tilting the rotors for speed. The Griffin responded instantly, the raw power in its airframe pulling her toward open sea instead of the abandoned NATO strip. The reaction from the troop bay was immediate. "What the hell are you doing?" One courier barked, unstrapping. The other went for the side hatch's emergency override. "Sit down," Riley said, voice like ice, "or I'll put this bird in a hover you won't walk away from." They froze, but she could feel their eyes boring into her helmet. "Vortex, this is control." Thompson's voice erupted in her headset, sharp enough to cut steel. "You're off course. Explain immediately." She kept her tone level. "Course change due to a possible compromise of mission integrity." "That's not your call," he snapped. "You're ordered to—" "I'm making it my call," she said, and cut the maincom feed. For the next 3 minutes, there was only the sound of the rotors and the low mechanical growl of the Griffin's engines. She pushed for maximum cruise, sensors sweeping for pursuit. It didn't take long to find it. 3 blips on radar, small, fast, likely tilt-wing drones. Not military spec, but armed. She thumbed the ECM controls. "Let's see how you like flying blind." A burst of interference painted the night behind her with digital static. But the drones pressed on, using visual tracking. "Fine. Time to fly." This bird like no one else could. The Griffin dove, skimming less than 100 feet above the waves, salt spray flecked her forward screens. She shifted the rotors back toward helicopter mode, bleeding speed just enough to let the lead drone close, then pitched up hard. Climbing into a vertical corkscrew, the drones couldn't match without losing lift. 2 dropped out immediately, splashing into the water. The third stayed on her. Weaving through the spray, Riley pulled a high-G banking turn into the wind shear of a coastal cliff, counting on the Griffin's stability system to keep her tight to the rock face. The drone followed until its sensors misread the cliff's curvature and slammed it into stone. Only when the radar sweep came back clean did she breathe. But the problem wasn't over. The couriers in the troop bay were murmuring to each other now, low, urgent tones. She couldn't hear the words, but she caught the tone. This wasn't over for them either. She opened the internal comm. "What's in the container?" Silence. Then one of them spoke, voice flat as before. "You're not cleared to know that." "Captain," she almost laughed, bitter, humorless. "I think we're past clearances." She set the Griffin down on a sliver of rocky coastline. No. More than 30 feet across, the rotors folded into standby pitch, but the engines stayed warm. "Open it," she said. The couriers didn't move, so she unstrapped, stepped back from the cockpit, and leveled her sidearm. Now, the first courier hesitated, then crouched at the container's keypad, fingers dancing across the lock. The lid released with a hiss. Inside wasn't a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It was a compact, sealed canister, transparent enough to reveal what floated inside. A small vial suspended in a protective cradle, filled with a faintly luminescent blue fluid. "What is that?" she asked, The courier glanced up. It's classified. She stepped closer. The fluid swirled slowly, catching the cabin's dim light. It wasn't tech. It wasn't hardware. It was biological. Her gut went cold. Is it viral? She asked. Neither. Courier answered, which was answer enough. Her mind raced. Morrison had trusted her with the most advanced rotorcraft in the arsenal for a rescue. And now for this. Was it the same reason? Because she could fly anywhere, unseen, and deliver. Something that no one was supposed to know existed? She sealed the container again. We're not taking this to point B, she said. Not until I know who's getting it. One courier leaned forward. If you think you're protecting people by keeping it, you're wrong. The people who want it back will burn through anyone in their way. Then I guess we'll see who burns faster, Riley said, strapping back into the cockpit. She lifted off, climbing into a bank of low cloud to vanish from any radar watching. The coastline, she didn't know where she was going yet, only that she wouldn't be flying toward the beacon. As the Griffin disappeared into the night, the canister in the cargo bay glowed faintly, like a warning waiting to be understood. The Griffin rode the low clouds like a shadow, slipping between layers of weather that hid her from both ground and aerial pursuit. But Riley knew she couldn't hide forever, not with the military's own tracking systems pinging for her transponder. She cut it. One flick of a guarded switch, and the Griffin HX9 went dark to friendly radar. That simple move made her an anomaly, a ghost, but also a target. Her options weren't good. Return to Fort Campbell and hand over the canister, trusting her chain of command to have good intentions. Or vanish with it and accept that she'd just committed career suicide, maybe worse. The couriers sat in silence, their black flight suits absorbing the dim glow of the troop bay's red lights. She could feel their eyes on her, even through their helmets. She switched the internal come on. Tell me where this thing was headed. The real destination. No answer. She tilted the Griffin 30 degrees in a descending bank. The kind of maneuver that made even seasoned passengers grab for straps. Last chance before I make this flight a lot rougher, she said. Finally, the one nearest the container spoke. It was going to NATO Special Projects in Brussels. Hand-to-hand transfer to a private biotech security division. Off the books. Why off the books? The man hesitated. Because if certain governments knew it existed, they'd start taking sides. And if other groups knew, they'd skip the politics and use it. Her hands tightened on the cyclic. And Morrison approved this? The couriers. Visor tilted toward her. Morrison ordered it. The name felt heavier now. Morrison. The same general she'd saved. The same woman who'd made her the Griffin's permanent pilot. Was this why? Because Morrison knew Riley could get places no one else could, without leaving a trace? She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them without feeding her the official version. Asher. She said into her encrypted channel. If you're still listening, I need a meet point. His voice came back faster than she expected. You're hot right now, Vortex. Friendlies are treating you as hostile. Unfriendlies want the container. Where are you? Somewhere between the middle of nowhere and too close to the coast. Name the spot. A pause. There's an old logging strip in the Smokies. Coordinates incoming, no cameras, no eyes but mine. She banked inland, the Griffin's tiltrooters, shifting for tight maneuvering through the dark mountain valleys. Here, even satellites had trouble keeping a lock. By the time she saw the narrow strip of dirt carved into the ridge, she could already make out a lone figure at the edge, a light in his hand shielded against the wind. Asher. She sat down in a spray of loose earth, rotors tilting back to standby. He climbed aboard without ceremony, eyes darting to the container. So you opened it? I needed to know what I was risking my career for. You mean your life, Asher corrected. He crouched by the container, checking the locks. This is a prototype, not a weapon in the traditional sense, but it can become one. It's a synthetic pathogen carrier, designed to survive. In hostile climates, deliver a payload, then self-neutralize. That's the theory. Riley stared at him. And in practice? He met her eyes. In practice, no one's tested it outside a lab, which is why you should not. Under any circumstances, let it reach anyone whose only plan is to test it. The couriers were shifting now, restless under the weight of his words. One finally stood, voice hard. You have no idea the kind of clearance needed to even look at that thing. You're interfering with global security. Asher's laugh was humorless. Global security? Is that what you call arming contractors with? A delivery system no treaty covers. Because that's exactly what NATO Special Projects is doing. The second courier moved, hand sliding toward a sidearm. Riley's voice cut the air. Don't. She stood between them and the cockpit, one hand near her own holster. Here's how this goes. I'm flying out of here with all of you still breathing. If you keep it that way, the plan formed in her head, even as she was speaking. She'd take them somewhere neither NATO nor her own command could get to first. A place she could buy time, force a real conversation. But before she could lift, a radar painted 2 fast-moving contacts inbound. Not drones this time. Aircraft, bigger. She flipped to come to Asher. Friendlies or unfriendly? He scanned the scope. If they were friendly, they'd have called in already. Time to go. The Griffin roared back to life, rotors tilting forward. She pulled up steep into the cold mountain air, the valley walls sliding beneath them. The contacts followed, closing. Whoever they were, they knew how to fly terrain, and they were faster than the drones had been. She pushed the Griffin to its edge, nose down, weaving through the dark ridgelines with inches to spare. The pursuing aircraft mirrored her moves, relentless. Asher leaned forward, voice steady despite the speed. Wherever you're headed, you better get there before they decide not to take you alive. The mountains blurred past in streaks of black and steel-gray moonlight, each ridge a wall she barely cleared before banking into the next valley. The Griffin HX9 was built for this high-speed, low-altitude evasion, but even she could feel the machine straining. Every vibration a reminder that pushing too hard could mean losing it all in a heartbeat. The 2 pursuing aircraft weren't letting go. Their radar signatures flickered in and out of her display as they ducked into the terrain's dead zones, staying just close enough to keep pressure on. Vortex, you can't outrun them forever. Asher warned. I don't need forever, she replied. Just long enough to make a choice. The choice had been building in her mind since the moment she saw the canister's faint blue glow. She couldn't hand it to NATO. She couldn't trust her own command chain. And she sure as hell couldn't destroy something without knowing exactly what it was capable of. That left one option. She had to bring it to the only person who could be forced to give her the truth. Face to face. She flicked the com to an open military band. This is Vortex. Inbound to Fort Campbell with priority cargo, scramble security on arrival. Tell General Morrison I'm coming straight to her. There was a pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize replied. Vortex, you are not cleared to land with that cargo. Redirect immediately to. She cut the feed. The couriers exchanged a look, understanding dawning too late. One started to stand, but Asher shifted, blocking him with the casual ease of someone who'd been in more fights than briefings. Riley kept her focus forward, the base perimeter lights finally breaking over the horizon. She brought the Griffin in low, fast, straight over the threshold. Landing gear kissing tarmac harder than usual. Security vehicles swarmed in, floodlights glaring. Armed personnel moved in on both sides, weapons trained not just on the couriers, but on her. Morrison was there, stepping out of a black SUV. Her face lit in alternating bursts by the strobe of the security lights. No salute, no formal greeting. Just a hard stare that didn't waver as Riley climbed down from the cockpit. Captain Harrison, Morrison said, voice even. You've just put your career, your life, and this program in jeopardy. Explain yourself. Riley gestured toward the cargo bay. Open it, Here, in front of me. Morrison's jaw tightened. That's classified. That's not an answer. Riley stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she could see the tension in Morrison's eyes. I flew you out of a kill zone because I trusted you. Now you tell me I've been running Black Ops deliveries for things that can end up in the wrong hands. That ends tonight. For the first time, Morrison's gaze shifted. Not in guilt, but in calculation. She gave a small nod to the security team. The container hissed open. The blue glowing vial sat inside, exactly as Riley had left it. Morrison's voice was quiet now, meant only for Riley. It's a deterrent. One no treaty covers. One no rival will risk. If it's out there, people think twice. And if it leaks? Riley asked. Morrison didn't answer. She didn't need to. Riley looked back at the Griffin, the machine that had been her dream, her proving ground, her weapon. She realized then that the aircraft had never been the real prize. It was just the perfect tool for people like Morrison and the missions no one wanted on the books. She stepped back, away from the container. Find someone else to fly it for you. Morrison's voice carried after her. Walk away, and you'll never fly again. Riley didn't stop. Then I walk. Asher caught up to her at the edge of the pad. You know they won't just let you go, he said. They'll have to find me first. She glanced at him. You still have those places with no cameras? He smiled faintly. A few. That night, the Griffin sat locked in the hangar. Rotor still, cockpit dark. Somewhere inside, its system slept. Waiting for the next pilot to try and bend it to their will, Riley didn't look back, because she'd learned something on this mission. Something she'd never forget. Sometimes the machine isn't the thing to be mastered. Sometimes it's the people who believe they can use it, and you, without consequence. And sometimes the quietest form of defiance isn't in saying no. It's in walking away while they're still waiting for you to agree.